Welcome to the Diligent Woman Podcast, where Christian women let go of their guilt and step out in confidence by bringing God into every part of the day, learning by examples in Scripture, applying simple principles, and trusting the Lord with it all. I am Angela Legg of thediligentwoman.com, and I welcome you to grow in grace and truth one step at a time. Let's get started. Welcome back. Season 5 of the Diligent Woman Podcast, where we are learning from the great cloud of witnesses who have gone before us. And we are studying the men and women from Scripture. And this week, this is episode 510, episode 510. We are looking at the story of Lot. The last few weeks, we have been looking at the people in the sphere of Abraham's story. We started with Abram in the time before Isaac was born, and we looked at his faith and how it's grown and some of the stories that we can learn from him. And there's so many. There's so many things that happened before Isaac was ever born. And we will get to the rest of Abraham's story here in a few weeks. But we've been taking the time since then to look at the other people who have been incorporated into that story and who were impacted by the promises that were made to Abraham and the choices that he made, and who, as they walk along, their stories are told as well. One of those is Sarah, his wife, obviously, and we talked about her. And then we also looked at Hagar last week, studied Hagar to look at her story, because she does have one. Her story is not simply that she was used by Sarah to try to achieve an heir for Abraham. That's part of the story. It's not all of the story. And she has an interaction with the Lord, and the Lord takes great pains to protect Hagar, and also makes promises to her son Ishmael that even though he is not the heir of Abraham, because that's not the son that God said was of promise, but God will look out for Ishmael. And so Hagar's story has lessons to give us just in her own right. So today we're going to look at another person who I think sometimes we tend to just fly by him, just try to overlook him. There's two instances, and tell me in the comments. I would love to hear from you. When you hear the name Lot, what do you think of? I don't know about you, but for myself, what comes readily to mind from what I've heard most of my life was Lot, who makes an unwise decision about where to live, and really not anything terribly impressive about him, just that he was in Sodom when he shouldn't have been, and he could have chosen better. And then you have the instance with his wife and what happened to her. And those things get emphasized a lot. He is used as a reference for us to be careful. Don't go putting yourself into bad, circumstances. If there's a city that is known to have, a certain type of behavior, don't go putting yourself in that place. Don't go try to be a righteous person amongst the unrighteous people. And that's generally, I don't know that in every single instance, but most of my growing up, that's how he has been boxed, that was really all that he had to offer. And I'm hoping today that we can look at the scriptures and explore a little deeper and see if maybe there's more to Lot's story. It reflects a great deal on Abraham, but Lot, like Hagar, has his own story. So let's take a look. And in Genesis chapter 11, we see at the end of the book, we see Terah, who is the father of Abram at that time, and the father of Nahor, and the father of Haran. And Haran is Abram's brother, and Haran has a son named Lot, and then Haran dies. Nahor is also Abram's brother. He marries, and Nahor stays in Ur of the Chaldeans, while Terah and Abram and Sarah and Lot all move. They all move on, and they go to Haran, because it says in Genesis 11:31 that they are looking to enter the land of Canaan, which I find fascinating. Kind of makes me, wonder, because not all of the writings in Genesis are precisely chronological. So I don't know at what point God gave the promise to Abraham. Did God give his promise that's recorded in chapter 12 to Abram, and Abram and Sarai decided to leave, and so Terah decides to go with, and Lot goes with them. I think that's possible since it says that they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. That was their intention. Because God says in chapter 12 and verse 1, go to a land which I will show you. So the implication being that it's, maybe not something that Abraham was familiar with and that they went. So, but in chapter 11 and verse 31, we see that it wasn't just Abraham and Sarah who went. It was Terah and Abram and Sarai and Lot. They all move. And in Haran, when they get as far as Haran, Terah dies. So Lot is with them, says in chapter 12 and verse 4 that when Abram went forth as the Lord had spoken to him, Lot went with him. Lot is Abram's nephew. And through the course of events, there's a lot of adventures, and I think Lot is with Abram through most of these. When the famine happens, it sends them to Egypt at the end of chapter 12 after the promises that God makes. They go to Egypt. And the promise that God has given is fairly recent. I don't know exact timing, but at least in the context, it's, this is a new idea. Abram fears for his life, and so he lies about who Sarai is and says it's a sister so that he's not going to be killed to take her. And we see that in chapter 13 and verse 1, that when Abram and Sarah leave Egypt after they have been asked to leave, after all the trouble that Abram caused by telling this lie to Pharaoh, and the Egyptians encourage them to leave with a great many possessions, including one of those is female servants. So maybe that's where Hagar came into the picture as she was an Egyptian. We see in chapter 13 and verse 1 that when they went up from Egypt to the Negev, that it was Abram and Sarah and all that belonged to him, and Lot was with them. So I think Lot went with them to Egypt because of the famine. Famine was an issue for Lot, same as it was for Abram and Sarah. So he's in Egypt with them, and he goes back to the Negev. As they're going along, though, they are growing, and their herds are growing, and they have too many animals to be sustained on the piece of land where they are gathered all together. Land can only handle so many animals eaten from it. It's got to have time to replenish. It's got to be, and it's causing a problem between the workers, the herdsmen. They're struggling. These men have a job. They've got to try to feed and water all these animals, and they're running out of room, and they're having to compete with each other to get this accomplished, is the implication. And so Abram, he tells them, okay, we need to not have strife. This is getting untenable. So let's separate. We've got all this land in front of us. So how about Lot, you choose, separate from me, take your livestock, take your things, and you go. And if you go to the left, then I will go to the right. If you go to the right, then I will go to the left. So let's look out. Let's see what's here. Lot looks up and he sees the potential of the valley of the Jordan. It's described in scripture that it was well watered everywhere. You have lots of flocks, you have lots of herds, you need water. It's well watered everywhere, and it is like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. So he sees this in his circumstances as a man who is raising all of this livestock. This is a good direction to go. And he makes a decision that he's going to go that way. Now, we are told that there is a city in that area called Sodom. Sodom and Gomorrah are both there. They're not destroyed yet. And we are told that that city is very wicked, and they were sinners against the Lord. The Lord comes in verse 14 of chapter 13. And again, he reiterates the promise. He gets a little more specific. Now he says, this is the land I'm going to give you, but you look out in every direction, north, south, east, and west, everything that you can see. It makes me think of a quote, everything that the light touches, right? Everything that he can see, God's going to give him that land. And God tells Abram, you go and you walk this land. You go stay in various places, and you go stay all over Canaan. I've never mapped that out to see just how far and wide Abram went. We're told various places that he was in. There's several marking places. That might be a fun map project for you and your kids on a state. Where all in Canaan? How much of Canaan did Abram see? It wasn't his yet, but how much of it did he wander and see throughout his adventures with the Lord from the time that he is given the promise and to the time they are in Canaan until his death? That would be an interesting mapping project. So anyway, so Lot goes to a place that's good for his herds. Abram goes the other way, so there's no longer this conflict between them. And God promises Abraham that he's going to take care of him and that all of this land is going to belong to his descendants. In a later conversation about these promises, God will also reiterate that you're not going to see this come true for yourself. You're not going to own this land personally. That's never in Abraham's scope. But he is going to see the land that will become theirs. So it's a very real place. He knows it is something that's tangible. It's just not something that he will see in his lifetime. So in the course of events, we're not told a lot about his nephew Lot. In chapter 14, a little bit of a civil war breaks out. Some of the kings are tired of paying, all of the money into this one king, and so they all decide to fight back. And that's it's a long-lived thing. God gives you how many years that they've been serving him, and, after 13 years, they rebel. It's like, nope, I just don't want to do it. And so he gathers other kings with him to work. And while this war is going on, the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, because remember, kings weren't like huge country kings. A lot of times you had a king over a city. That little city was its own protectorate and its own little kingdom. So the kingdoms of Sodom and Gomorrah, they fled. And then these kings come and fall on those cities. But those who survived fled into the hill country. So they just take everything from Sodom and Gomorrah. These kings do. They take all the food and they leave. And in that, they also sweep up some people. They sweep up Lot, everything he owns, and they leave. And we see further down that it also included some women and children who were there. So they get kidnapped in the middle of this civil war between these kings because somebody was just taking advantage of the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah having run for the hills, literally. They run out and they just abandon the cities. Well, what do? You're going to go take all of that for yourselves. They got armies to feed. Go take the plunder. So they take that, but they also take Lot and some other women and children. Well, Abram gets word of this. A fugitive comes and tells him what has happened. And he's over by the Oaks of Mamre. And he hears what happens to Lot, and he takes his men that are with him. He's got 318 men, and they go to pursue as far as what comes to be known as Dan. It's not called Dan now at the time because that tribe doesn't exist. It's that area in the northern part of Canaan that Israel will be called Dan, allotted to him. So he pursues them to the northern part of the country to rescue Lot and his people. He and his 318 men managed to deceive and pursue and defeat and divide those forces and defeat them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus, again in the northern part of the country. And he brings back all the goods and also brought back Lot and his possessions and also the women and the people. So Abraham goes and saves everybody. Good old boy. He saves everybody, doesn't take anything for himself. The king of Sodom wants to award him with something. He says, no, because I don't want you to think I owe you anything. I don't want you to be able to claim that you made me great, and I don't want any connection with you. He says, no, thank you. But he does allow for the people who lost their things and for the men who went to war for their benefit. He allows them to receive payment for that. But Abram doesn't take anything, and everybody goes home. And it's a happy day. The king of Sodom and his people go back home. And that's the last thing that we hear about Lot until we get a little bit later when it's time for God he comes and he tells Abraham and Sarah that in chapter 18, he's coming to tell them, you're going to have a son in a year. And if we're following our timeline, if it's at all correct in the chronological order. Lot being kidnapped was somewhere in the years prior to Ishmael being born. So, and we're told that Ishmael, that whole event with Hagar and all of that, was 10 years into the time that Abram and Sarah are in Canaan. So at that point, they've been in there 10 years. So it's sooner than that, whenever Lot is taken captive. And then if you fast forward to chapter 18, it's 14 years later. Ishmael has grown, and Abram is now 99, and he's being told that this time next year, you will have a son. And he says, I will be 100. So we've moved forward in time. So it's another 14 years before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is at hand. God's been very long-suffering with these evil people. He already declared that they were evil. I don't know if the commentary back in the chapter when they chose which direction to go, in chapter 13, I don't know if that commentary is hindsight looking back saying Sodom was evil, or if it's in real time that it was already evil. It obviously was not evil enough to be destroyed, because God waits we think at least 14 years, maybe more than that, before this actually happens. So in chapter 18, God, the Lord, and two of his messengers come to Abraham. They come to visit, come to tell them, a year from now, you're going to have your son. The promise is going to come true. And in that context, while they're there, the Lord decides he needs to tell Abraham about what's coming, about Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not mentioned that it has anything to do with Lot, but I think that's implied, because why else would he care about these particular cities? And God makes the point that he wants Abraham to know this in verse 17, 18, 19 of chapter 18. He wants to tell Abraham this because Abraham is going to become a great and mighty nation, and he's been chosen so that he will command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. Sodom and Gomorrah is a lesson, and it's an emphasis that Abraham needs to learn so he can teach the generations to come after, that God keeps his promises. He punishes the evildoer, but he protects those who are doing righteousness and justice, which Sodom is not. And so he thinks it's valuable to let Abraham know about this. They have a conversation, and Abraham, to his credit, never once mentions his nephew. He's just concerned. He's like, but what if there's, some people who are still righteous? What if there's 50 people who are there in the city? I know the city's terrible, but what if there's 50 people? Are you going to wash them away with everybody else? And God says, no, if I can find 50 righteous, we'll do that. And Abraham kind of keeps going. He goes, okay, so it's not 50, but what if it's 40? What if it's 30? What if it's 10? And God says, if I can find 10 righteous, I won't destroy the city. God already knows that there's not 10 righteous, but he tells Abraham, he's showing Abraham that he can be merciful in his justice. And he's going to be ultimately very merciful, right? But there are not going to be 10 who can be saved. It's not enough to redeem the whole city. And so the Lord leaves, and the messengers go on to Sodom because they've got a job to do. And they go to Sodom, and Lot is sitting at the gates, and he sees them coming. So Lot is living amongst the people, and he's living there. And just take a second. As I said before, there tends to be a lot of criticism about Lot living here, that he shouldn't have had anything to do with that. Nowhere in Scripture does God make that statement. And I believe that's a burden that we kind of put on ourselves and that we put on Lot, that it's not right for us to put that judgment there. God doesn't condemn Lot for being here. And in fact, there's an argument to be made that if Lot hadn't been here, then, who knows what would have happened. I don't know. But Lot sees them. They come in, and the men of God say they intend to sleep in the square, presumably you would think that would be by the well. There's a public place, and they were just going to stay in the square. And Lot is like, no, you don't want to do that. You need to come stay with me, because he knows about the city. And he urged them strongly, so they come and they enter his house, and they go with him. And then you have this unfortunate event happen. These men of the city, the men, young and old, come and demand, men from every quarter. Somehow the whole city knows that these visitors have shown up. Man, that's an alert system, right? They know these two men have shown up, and they go call on Lot, and they want these men brought out to them so they can be with them, so they can have relations with them. And Lot goes outside. That seems incredibly brave to me. He doesn't leave the door shut. Just be quiet. Hopefully they'll go away. Just be quiet. Nope. He goes out and faces the mob. He goes out, shuts the door behind him, and he tries to get the mob to calm down and to see reason. This is an evil thing that they're wanting to do, and he tries to stop them from doing this evil thing. There's an argument to be made that he is trying to save their souls, so far as it depends on him, to get them to do not this horrible, unnatural thing. And instead, he says, please do not act wickedly. He offers his daughters to them. And I don't know, I know in hindsight, this looks so awful. And I think it was awful. I'm not sure what other options he has. He's trying to deal with a mob. It's kind of hard to reason with a mob. But he offers his daughters because in the realm of sin, there was one of these things that is worse than the other. It's bad to come abuse anybody. But it is worse for you to do this unnatural thing. 1, these are visitors. 2, these are men. This is not right. There's nothing right about this. And he tries to stem the tide by offering his 2 virgin daughters instead. I don't know what's going through his head, other than he's probably scared. But he knows what they're wanting to do is evil. And he tries to stop that. And he says, but don't do anything to these visitors who have come and they're sheltering under my roof. And their response is, stand aside. And then they are looking at him. He's been here, we think, at least over 20 years, right? This one came in as an alien, and already he is acting like a judge. Their attitude is, how dare you tell us what we should do? I don't want to hear from you, Lot. We don't want to hear your righteousness. Don't want to hear it. And so he goes, so because you're acting this way, we're going to treat you worse than them. They now threaten Lot physically. The implication is they're going to take down the door. They're going to take those men. They're going to abuse them, and they're going to abuse Lot. They're not interested in doing the right thing. They're not interested in doing the natural thing. They have a very evil focus in mind, and they are willing to hurt anybody to do it. And they are pressing on the door so hard that they came near to breaking the door. So Lot is being pressed against this door. And they are taking the men of God. They reach out their hands and they bring Lot into the house and they shut the door. Then all of those men who are pressing in on the door, they're struck blind. But even that doesn't stop them. They're struck blind in the doorway, both the young and the old, the small and the great, so that they wearied themselves trying to find the doorway. Can you imagine that picture? People so frenzied. I actually get a picture in my head of actually some zombie movies. The intent, focus to try to do something mindlessly, because that's just what you're going to do. So much so that you cannot be stopped, cannot be deterred. I'm just going to keep going after that, even to the detriment. It will hurt you doing that. But these are not zombies. These are not men without minds. They did this on purpose. And they are struck blind. A miracle happens to them. The entire group is struck blind. And yet that doesn't stop them from trying to get through that door. Wow, they think they have a right to evil. And they have a right to do that thing. And they're going to take it, no matter what. But they weary themselves out. So all that's going on outside the door. So Lot, while he's inside, the men of God talk to him. And they say, who else is here? Meaning, who else is in Sodom? Who's here? Because you need to gather your people up. And they tell him, he goes, your son, a son-in-law, and who's here, a son-in-law and your sons and your daughters, whomever you have in the city, you need to bring them out of the place because we're getting ready to destroy this place because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. God in his mercy says, Lot, you can get your people out, but you got to go get them. He didn't send a whole army of messengers to come and grab all of those people. It was like with Rahab. They had to be gathered in this place, and they all have to cooperate. They all have to do something if they want the benefit. Well, he goes out to talk to his future sons-in-laws. These are the ones who are about to marry the 2 daughters that he has at home. And he tells them, you need to get up because the Lord is coming to destroy this. And it says in verse 14 of chapter 19, but he appeared to his sons-in-laws to be jesting. They think he's telling a joke. What a thing to joke about. But they think he's joking, so they don't go. Morning comes. The messengers urge Lot, you need to get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you're going to be swept away in the punishment of the city. It's going to happen if you need to leave. But Lot hesitates. So the men seized his hand, the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him, and they brought him out and put him outside the city. God's compassion was moved to so strongly move Lot out. They grab them up, they take them out, they get outside of the city, they tell them to run, go, you need to go, don't look back, do not stay anywhere in the valley, go to the mountains or you'll be swept away. Well, Lot is afraid of the mountains for some reason. Don't know why. He says, oh no, he goes, if I go to the mountains, disaster will overtake me and I will die. They're literally saving him and he can't see that he's being saved. He thinks he's being sent to his death, which what sense does that make? Because they're saving you from being killed. But he's afraid of going to the mountains. And so he asks, can I please stay in this little teeny tiny town over here? Can I stay there? And he says, yes, you can stay there. We will not destroy it. We won't let it get caught in the wave of destruction. But you need to go because I can't do my job until you're gone. So Lot and his family go to the city of Zoar. And then when the sun had risen, Lot comes to Zoar, and then God rains down on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew the cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. There's nothing left. It's scorched earth. But Lot's wife, she looks back. They're looking from Zoar. She looks back, and she becomes a pillar of salt. They said, don't look back. But she did. The city that they've known, that they've raised their family in, that everything they own is back there, she looked back. Didn't trust. We're also told in verse 27 that Abraham rose up and he looks that direction and he can see the smoke of the land from what has happened. He can see the results. So he knows God could not find 10 people. The city is destroyed. So God destroyed the cities, but it tells us in chapter 19, verse 29, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. Next week, Lord willing, we'll talk about Lot's wife and the daughters in this circumstance. But here in Genesis, this author tells us that God protects Lot because of Abraham, that it is because of his regard for Abraham that he does that. But if we go over to 2 Peter in chapter 2, I always find this rather impressive, this description of Lot, this commentary that is given on this circumstance that Peter gives. In the context of 2 Peter chapter 2, he's talking about these false prophets that could come in amongst the brethren, and that God is going to deal swiftly with these people who are only following their sensuality, and the way of truth is going to be maligned because of what they teach, and their greed is going to exploit them, and they're going to cause all kinds of judgment and destruction to come down because God will have to deal with what happens because of them. And in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4, He says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, and if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who would live ungodly lives thereafter, and if he rescued righteous Lot, oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men, for by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge the flesh in its corrupt desires and despise authority." Peter uses Lot, along with Noah, to teach that God knows how to save people from situations that they think there is no remedy for. He teaches us that the righteous God will protect, and he describes Lot in very glowing terms. He says here that righteous Lot was oppressed by the behavior of the people in Sodom. And the implication is not just in that last moment when he literally was pressed against the door, but that it was while he was living there. Felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. So now go back and look at the story of Lot in that moment, and when he is trying to save the men of God who are visitors to this town, trying to keep them from the hands of the mob. This is who he was. He's living amongst these people, but he's not one of them. He's not giving approval of them. He's not participating in these things with them. And it just tears his soul apart. But God saved him. And we're supposed to learn that lesson. Peter makes the point that God, he will save the righteous. Right? He's going to, there is a way out. God is the way out. And it, with Noah and Lot both, neither one of them could have orchestrated their salvation on their own by any thought that they could have. Noah wouldn't have come up with an idea to build a giant boat to save himself about a rains that were coming, because how could he have imagined the magnitude of the rain, the magnitude of the need to build a boat big enough? He wouldn't have. Only God. But my friend, Lot is given right alongside of Noah. And man, we give a lot of praise to Noah. But Lot doesn't get a lot of praise. God said he was righteous through Peter's writings. He's not perfect, but he's righteous. And this is the man who, in a moment when there is a mob of people who want to do nothing but harm, when they come to his door, he stands up bravely. He doesn't just leave the door shut. He doesn't just send his servants out to be attacked. He goes out bravely to confront that mob. And that's kind of a different picture than what we're often given about him. And I wonder if that's not a good lesson for us, that over in Romans 12, we're given a little synopsis of basically how we're supposed to live, for the Lord. In Romans 12, 1 and 2, I mean, this is just a simplification of all of the information that's given throughout the epistles, especially in the book of Romans. But in Romans 12, 1 and 2, we're told, "Therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." And then verse 3. "For through the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith." I think we forget when we look at some of these stories and shine a bright light down on them, and we're hypercritical because we are the Monday morning quarterback, we get to look back and look at their circumstance and pick it apart and be judgmental about it. We can go back and see all the things that he did wrong. We can go back and say that Lot was wrong for having gone to the area of Sodom in the first place. He shouldn't have gone to the valley of Jordan because he should have known the circumstances. God never says that. And in fact, Abraham says if Lot had gone the other way, Abraham would have gone that direction himself. Abraham standing there didn't try to warn Lot off and say, now don't go that way because there's some evil people down there. There were evil people all around them. Sodom and Gomorrah was maybe uniquely evil in the magnitude at that time, but eventually all of Canaan, when Israel comes in, those nations lose that land because they are evil. Israel coming in and getting the land of Israel is a means by which God punishes those nations for their sins. He states that unequivocally. You are getting to come in and do this. I'm giving you this land because those nations no longer have a right to it. I want them out because of the sins that they have. It's God's timing. He tells Abraham specifically when he tells him, you don't get to have this land, but I want you to know your people are going to get it, but they've got to go into slavery first, and then after 400 plus years, they're going to come out and they're going to get to go in this land. He goes, but they can't have it yet because the time isn't right to deal with these people. God is still being long-suffering with the nations in Canaan. But yet he still sends Abraham to live amongst them. He calls Abraham to be a righteous man, to walk with him. We know that there is Melchizedek, who is a priest of God, living amongst these people. And he's a righteous man. So there are these people living amongst all of the people. Lot is not given any special instruction to be more righteous than everybody else by knowing for sure not to plant yourself somewhere where there might be sinful people. Guess what? The world is full of sinful people. He had to make a decision with the information in front of him to do what was best for his people and his herds and for his livelihood. He did that without going and doing something sinful himself, but he chose the land that was best for them. That's all that God shows us in that decision. And he will be blessed. We're told over in the book of Deuteronomy that there were lands that God appropriated that were not going to be given to Israel. They were not going to take those areas over. In Moab and in Ammon, those were being reserved for Lot's people back then. God gave him a special place to be, just as he does with Ishmael and just as he does with Abraham. It's just he has a certain purpose for Abraham's people, but God looked out for Lot's people too. So I think we need to be careful about going back and being hypercritical of Lot's choices. If you have the knowledge that a place is nothing but evil, there's nothing good amongst them, and you have a choice in the matter, and you want to take your family somewhere that's not that evil, you have the knowledge and the wherewithal to do that. But if the place where you're needing to go to work, and that's the only place that you know of that in that moment has a place that offers you a place to provide for your family and to do for that, I don't believe Lot's story is one that condemns you for taking the location that is beneficial to you providing for your family. I don't think it's a story that builds it up bigger than it needs to be either, because God doesn't make a judgment about that. But he tells us who Lot was in the middle of being around all those people. And he says he was righteous. How do you stay righteous among a world that is so full of sin? When you've got a world around you where our leaders and our people are so mixed up, and it seems so prevalent. But my friend, we are not yet to the days of Noah or even the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. There are locales, there are certain places I think that are probably close to Sodom and Gomorrah, where a large number of the people in that area are hyper-focused on sinful behavior. Those places probably exist. I'm certain they exist because there's people on the planet. But we are not to the days of Noah, where men's hearts are continually on evil and murder all the day. That's not where we are, because there's still hope. Because you and I are still having these conversations. There are still people that are looking to the Lord, that are trying to do what is right and to be righteous, even though the world around them is terrible. Esther had to live amongst the Persians. That was a circumstance she was in. Never was a suggestion that the answer was, oh no, you can't be part of a harem. Oh no, you can't be in these circumstances at all. We need to hide and run away. We need to leave the captivity that God put us in, because this is a punishment for our people. We need to leave that because the sin of being a part of a harem would be worse as the king goes around looking for a new wife. Nope. An opportunity is seen to do what you can from where you are. It's not a burden on Esther that the king had a harem. She and the king have their relationship, and she does what she's supposed to do within her relationship with the king. It's not a judgment against her that the king does other things. No, God never lays that on her. We're not ever shown that. And sometimes we are not always in control of our circumstances, and her godly uncle Mordecai said, who knows, but maybe this is why you're here for such a time as this. God's going to save his people because he said he would save his people, but maybe, Esther, you're the way this is going to happen. Maybe you're being put here because you're a righteous woman. Maybe you're being put into this situation to have an influence. Maybe this is where you are. Do with it what you will. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, all of them, the answer was not to remove themselves from the captivity where these sinful people are. It was be what God wants you to be where you are. They're taken in as rightful slaves in that world, in that circumstance. They didn't have the right to just free up and leave. If you have a choice, make a choice, but don't bear the burden of that you never make the right one. Do what you can today with the knowledge that you have. You cannot make a decision today based on what you're going to know 15 years from now, any more than Lot could. Could Lot foresee that Sodom was going to go that far, that God was going to have to come in and burn it all to the ground? 15 years before, was he going to have to know that that was the outcome? No. You don't know what's going to happen between now and 15 years from now. You make the best decision that you can, and you walk with the Lord today. And don't think more highly of yourself than you should. Abraham was asking God for mercy for anyone who was his in those cities. And God heard him, and he said, if I can find 10, I won't destroy the whole thing. There were not 10. There weren't 2. There was 1, and he was Lot. And Peter tells us that he has a powerful message for us to show us that God can save his people. It may seem like a hopeless situation to you. You don't know which way to turn. You're struggling in how to be a good and righteous person. So much sin going on around you. Lord, I feel burdened. I feel heavy. I feel the pressure of these people every day around me doing nothing but sin. His soul was tormented by that. Do you ever feel tormented by the sin going on around you, by the choices that your children make, by the choices that the people of the world around you make, the choices that you see when you're watching social media? Just such a mess. But don't think more highly of yourself that you think that that's all meant for you to fix. God is the answer. God is the salvation for you, and he's the salvation for any of those people who want it. Anyone who wants to come lay down their lives in front of him and live their lives as a living sacrifice before the Lord, salvation is available to them if they will take it. God's offering it to them. He's showing them the way. Lot had to have his hand held. Come on, let's go. Because God was going to save him. Not everybody's faith is the same. Abraham willingly said, okay, let's just go. Wherever you're going to take me, I'll go. No fear. There doesn't seem to be any question with Abraham. Lot has a little bit of fear. He was brave enough to face the mob, but the mountain scared him. Okay, so Abraham is a 5-talent level faith, and Lot is a 2. God doesn't condemn the person who has 2 talents for not being the one who has 5. He just says, do what you can with what you have, with who you are. You do the best that you can do, but bring fruit to the Lord. God says Lot was righteous. And while his situation seems devastating and hopeless and maybe avoidable, I don't know. Lot obviously didn't think leaving was the answer. This is the world he lived in, and he was just trying to be the best man he could be in these circumstances. And the people around him acknowledged it. He's casting judgment on them by telling them they shouldn't do this, and they're saying, who are you to tell us that? He had a different perspective than they did. And boy, they didn't appreciate it. But God glorified him for doing the right thing. And next week, again, we'll talk about Lot's wife and the daughters next week. But after all of these circumstances, after this run-in, after this story, this is it. God doesn't need to tell us anything else about Lot, other than the reference in Deuteronomy where it is said that his people have areas that are singled out for them, that will not go to Israel, that will go to Lot's people. Those areas are going to be for them. There isn't any more story about Lot. In Luke, his story is referenced, and it's talking about the absoluteness of when God comes for judgment. And there is mention of Lot and Lot's wife in that context, and we'll get into that more next when we talk about her. But otherwise, there's not anything except for what's in the book of Peter. We're not given any more stories. We're not given all of his life. We don't know how old he was when he died. We don't know where it was, We just know where he ended up with the daughters, and that's the end of the story. But the one story that God focuses on to tell you about Lot, Peter says, is one that is supposed to shine a light to show that God will save the righteous. He's capable of saving the righteous while at the same time punishing the unrighteous. God is just. God is merciful. He is long-suffering, but he is always just. He will save the righteous while also punishing the evildoer. So I want to encourage you, grab the study builders that are down. You can get them in the description below. Grab one of those and do a character study of Lot. But when you walk away from Lot's story, the character you're going to learn most about is God. So take one of those forms, fill in, get all of the scriptures that pertain to Lot. I'll also include those in the description below. And take them and study them and see what you learn about God through Lot's life. Righteous Lot. He has a story to tell. He has a story to share with you. And I hope that you go and are encouraged by that. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Tell me what you think. What did you think about Lot before? What do you think about Lot now? And how do you merge the two? So anyway, enjoy, and Lord willing, next week we will continue our stories with his wife and his daughters. Thanks for joining me today on the Diligent Woman podcast. Please subscribe to be notified of new episodes and share those with your friends. Until next time, enjoy.